friends, welcome back. So one of my goals for 2021 is to expand this channel a little bit beyond just book content. One of the reasons that I named this channel Stories and Sarah versus like Books and Sarah or Reading with Sarah, well, partially it was because I feel like all those names were taken already, but the other reason is I did want to leave myself a little bit more room to not just talk about books and talk about other kinds of stories. So one of my goals for 2021 is to include some podcast content and podcast discussions, reviews, all that kind of stuff for the new year, and we'll just see how it goes. Maybe it'll be a total flop. Maybe none of you guys listen to podcasts, but I'm someone who loves spoken word entertainment. I love listening to audiobooks, and I also love listening to podcasts. I listen to a ton of podcasts. To be honest, I feel like less recently, just because I've been so much more focused on reading and all of that kind of stuff. But I thought I would start this off with doing a wrap up of the podcast series that I finished in December. And obviously there's some podcasts that just kind of go on indefinitely that are more like little like weekly shows or conversations or interview style podcasts. I'm not going to talk about that as much today, but I'm going to talk about more of the podcast narrative series that kind of have a definite beginning and end or like a complete like season. And that is what I'm going to be talking about. So let's get into it. So I finished 2 podcast series in December, and both of them, I have to say, were excellent. They were both true crime podcasts, and I have to say that is my favorite genre of podcasts ever since like the Serial days. If you remember that, I have been hooked on the true crime podcast. So let's talk about the first one. If I can find... What the heck was the name of it? Okay, so this podcast was called Your Own Backyard, and this is a true crime murder, but we're not really quite sure if it's a murder mystery of the disappearance of this girl named Kristen Smart. And I forget the exact time period. I want to say this happened in like the 90s. But basically this girl, Kristen Smart, she was this young, gregarious, blonde surfer kind of girl who was in college in California. And she goes to this college party. It's kind of like a stereotypical college party, trying to make friends, trying to socialize on a weekend. And she is just never heard from. She completely disappears, and no one ever sees her again, whether dead or alive. She just completely disappears. And I think what was so fascinating about this story is very early on, there is this one suspect who is the prime suspect. And it's pretty clear that this person seems to be involved in this disappearance, but for one reason or another, like investigators, the police just can't put all the pieces together to completely figure out what happened to Kristen. And this story, I have to say, gave me chills. Like, if anyone has listened to it, there's this scene that they talk about with a watch and the watch going off early in the morning and someone hearing it. And I have to say, I literally, I was home alone this one night and I literally could not even sleep with my lights off because it was just so creepy, this one scene. So yeah, a very atmospheric, very creepy, and the story itself, I think, is a very important story, and I'm glad that this podcast narrator was able to get her story out there. I think the only reason, I would probably say this is like a 4-star podcast for me. The only thing I didn't love about it is, as I said, they did kind of narrow in on a suspect pretty early on, so that you don't necessarily have as much intrigue when it comes to like figuring out who is involved. And obviously I don't want to critique too much someone's like actual disappearance, because obviously that is extremely sad and important subject matter, but from a narrative perspective, that was the only thing that I didn't quite love about it. I would definitely recommend it nonetheless. So that was the first one I listened to. The second podcast that I just finished today, which was one of the craziest like fraud cases I've ever heard of, was this story called Chameleon. And when I first saw the synopsis of this podcast, I was like, maybe not as interesting. Like, give me some freaking gore, like murder mystery. That's my thing. Like, I don't know if this is going to be as interesting, but basically this story, it starts off telling the perspective of these people who work in Hollywood who aren't necessarily like the lead actors, but they're kind of supporting staff people or like supporting members of a of a movie set. So we have like the personal trainer, the makeup artist, security guard, all of these types of people. Basically, these people are getting called by these really high up Hollywood producers and these people who are putting together these movies, and they get called from these people and they're saying, hey, I want you to be part of this movie. I want you to fly to Indonesia and be part of this movie crew. And these people get there, and then they're like, something is not quite adding up. I don't know if this is a scam. That is just the tip of the iceberg of this story. It's like, I thought this was like kind of what the story was about, and then it kind of unfolded, it kept unfolding, and there kept being more and more layers to this story. It was insane. Like, it was, if you like true crime, but you don't necessarily want all the gruesome gore, murders, like blood and guts kind of stuff, and you just want something that's a little bit more lighthearted, if I could even say that, of a true crime podcast, I would highly recommend this. It hooked me in from the very beginning. I would definitely recommend Chameleon. So yeah, those are the two podcasts that I finished this month. Both of them were very good. I nothing really to complain about. But yeah, that's it. Hopefully you liked my first podcast wrap up for December. If you want to hear my reading wrap up, I will post that probably around the same time as this one, if it's not out already. And if you like podcast content and you want me to talk a little bit more about podcasts on this channel, definitely let me know down in the comments. I would love to know your thoughts on that. And yeah, that's it. Bye guys.